charge. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas joins us now. Congresswoman, it's great to have you back on the show. Let's start with this meeting on Monday with Leader Hakeem Jeffries that he announced in the past hour. What do you expect to come out of this meeting with the House Democratic Caucus?
I think that we're going to be encouraged to keep our focus on the American people, especially those federal workers right now that really don't know what's going to happen. Right now, it's been so encouraging to see so many of my colleagues that have returned to the district going and visiting with those TSA workers who typically are paid biweekly, and unfortunately, they are not necessarily making a lot of money, so there's a lot of stress. There's other things that we're doing to advocate, making sure that, you know, payday loans with no interest are available at some of those federal institutions, such as Navy Federal Credit Union and some of those others. So I think that we will continue to do everything that we can, making sure that we're keeping our focus on those hardworking federal workers that unfortunately are in the crosshairs of this terrible administration, as well as making sure that we're listening to the concerns of our constituents, something that Republicans are afraid to do.
Congresswoman, is there a middle ground, a so-called middle ground, imagine these days, that GOP swing state senators could get behind, that also Democrats could potentially compromise on? Or do you have a red line that you just don't want to see Democrats cross when it comes to negotiating this bill?
Yeah, so here's the deal. I mean, you know, there's a lot of things that so-called middle ground Republicans should be engaging in. But when you look at somebody like, for instance, if we look on the House side, Mike Lawler pretends to be kind of this middle ground, non-MAGA person. But when you look at his voting record, it is clear that it is just as MAGA can be, right? And so a lot of these Republicans say a lot of things, but then they don't follow through. And the few that are willing to kind of just do what's right, because honestly, this is not really a partisan issue, or it shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is right versus wrong. When we're talking about healthcare, we're not only talking about Democrats. Democrats aren't the only people that get sick. I mean, last time I checked, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, or MAGA, you still are a human being. So last time I checked, we all need healthcare, right? So the fight that we are waging right now is a real one. And while Ted Cruz wanted to talk about they voted for clean CRs, he didn't tell the other side of that. Number one, Joe Biden sat down and talked to them, and he initiated those conversations because he was a master negotiator, not someone who said he was, but in reality, as someone who served in public service for over 50 years. And one of the things that they consistently did, if you guys will recall, is every time we had to deal with the CR, they wanted to deal with the debt ceiling, and they wanted to cap our spending, and they wanted to make sure that we weren't necessarily, they always held the debt ceiling over our head. So they always drew blood, and sadly enough, them drawing blood was not anything on behalf of the American people as a whole.
Congresswoman, can I ask you about the messages this administration has posted, for example, on the HUD site, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, blaming Democrats for the shutdown, this blatantly partisan language that they've pushed on federal government websites. Also, federal workers claiming that their away messages on their emails have been taken over in a similar fashion. Is this even legal?
As far as I'm concerned, it's not. It seems like a clear violation of the Hatch Act, but this administration could care less about whether or not they are engaging in legal or illegal actions. You know, this is just who they are. In fact, they have made it clear that they have no respect for the law. They have no respect for any order whatsoever. They have no respect for court orders or anything else. I mean, you know, everything that they do, not just coming out of the White House itself, but literally when you look at the other portions of this executive branch, especially when you look at ICE and the types of things that they're doing. So, you know, do they care? No. And if a court tries to shut them down, is it going to matter? Probably not. And do we have a Department of Justice that will do anything? No. I mean, we are really in a situation where it is corruption on top of corruption, and basically anyone who sits in silence or does nothing, they're complicit in this corruption. And it is a really sad day, and sad days coming so long as this man is still the president of the United States.
Congresswoman, let me get your thoughts on some of the breaking news tonight, including just recently, not too long ago, a court order in Portland, basically or effectively saying that it's unlawful for the president to send troops into Portland. You just talked about court orders being ignored. This a victory, obviously, for the lower court standing up to the administration. But your thoughts on what is both happening in Chicago and this decision to declare the sending of troops into Portland unlawful. Same what we saw in L.A., but not slowing this administration down.
No, I mean, always, again, I mean, this isn't hyperbole, right? Like, we have a rogue administration. I mean, if we really are going to use some of the words of Ted Cruz, then we can go back to him when he was talking about the FEC commissioner, when he decided to say that they are more like gangsters. I forget the exact terminology
Mobsters,
that he used.
Yeah, when he was
Mob bosses, basically, is what's coming. Yeah, mobsters, right? And that's what you're seeing, right? Like, you're seeing this kind of mob mentality. It's like, listen, I have the position, and I'm going to do whatever I want to. And frankly, the Supreme Court gave him license when, for the first time in the history of this country, we had a president that was concerned about immunity because he knows that he does not like to follow the law. He doesn't care about the law, yet he's claiming that he's sending in these troops illegally so that he can bring about law and order. Now, how crazy is that? And when we talk about Chicago, in fact, the event I just left, I talked about Chicago because I don't think that it's really been uttered enough. That one of the things that I say all the time when I'm doing some of my talks is that I need you to survive. It's a gospel song. But the point of it that I try to make for a lot of people is that there are people that wanted to say, well, I'm not an immigrant, so that's not my problem, and they taking our jobs anyway, according to Trump, right? And so now we're seeing that, like, no, it is your problem. It is all of our problems because immigrants contribute to this country. Stop falling for the okie doke. Stop believing the lies that they are putting out there and the terrible racist tropes that they are constantly using to rile people up. It is time to recognize that while you thought the enemy was the immigrant, or you thought the enemy was the trans person, or you thought that the enemy was the black folk, or you thought the enemy were the women, when the reality is that the only person that is harming you right now, if you are struggling to make sure that you can pay your bills, if you're struggling to feed your family, if you are struggling to find a job, if you are struggling to keep your business open, or if you are a farmer, while we currently have record level bankruptcies by farmers, it is not any of those people on the list. It is the old white Nepo baby that is sitting in the White House that is causing all the destruction, pain, and problems that you are enduring.
Congresswoman, can I ask you really quick right before we go to break, do you think it was a coincidence that the building this administration chose to send Black Hawk helicopters and flashbang grenades into was a building made up of black U.S. citizens and Latino immigrants?
Absolutely not. Everybody knows who lives on the south side of Chicago. That's where my grandmother was when I was growing up. South side of Chicago is absolutely a black area. But again, that's why we have to understand that once they divide us off into silos and try to pretend as if it's not our problem, the reality is that if we're okay with them doing illegal things to somebody else, then the illegal things will somehow show up at your doorstep. And unfortunately, and I'm not saying that the people on the south side of Chicago felt that way, those black folk, I'm not saying that, but I am trying to make sure that people start to understand that we need to focus on what brings us together in our commonality, instead of looking at the things that are different about us and divide us, because that is how they are winning. Divided we fall, united we stand.
In a surprising development, Trump's own Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, made some bombshell comments this week about the convicted sex criminal, who at one point was his neighbor. Take a listen.
I say to him, massage table in the middle of your house? How often you have a massage? And he says, every day. And then he gets weirdly close to me. Ooh. And he says, and the right kind of massage. That's what his MO was, get a massage, get a massage. And what happened in that massage room, I assume, was on video. This guy was the greatest blackmailer ever. Blackmailed people. That's how he had money.
Oh, man.
Unsettling.
Oh, man.
Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. She's still here with us. Congresswoman, what are the next steps after you hear all of these details? Are lawmakers going to get Lutnick right in front of them?
Absolutely, I hope so. You know, and frankly, I wouldn't even want to bring him before the full committee. We get 5 minutes, and typically people take those 5 minutes to kind of put on their show. I actually would want a transcribed interview or a deposition, which we have done a number of those. Recently, we did a transcribed interview of Alex Acosta, and we would really need to dig in. I mean, this is someone who basically says that he knew that he was a pedo or something strange was going on, and he lived next door to him. And so it would be very good to get information out of him, find out what types of documents, if any, he has, meaning if he had any camera footage and that kind of stuff, and if it is archived somewhere so that we could see who was coming and going, and hopefully be able to do the investigation that seemingly the Department of Justice either did not do or they've just refused to turn over the rest of the files. Because I will remind the American people that a subcommittee on oversight did send lawful subpoenas over, and the Department of Justice, well, they basically have shut down and have stopped giving us stuff. And when Kash Patel came before our committee, Judiciary Committee, he basically was kind of like tiptoeing around it and saying, well, you know, we're only going to give you those things that we can lawfully give you. And it's like, well, you got a lawful subpoena, honey. So if there is a question about whether or not something should be divulged, then maybe we should go to court. But not you determining what we shouldn't get. That's not how subpoenas work.
Congresswoman, the Wall Street Journal had an investigation that showed how many premier banks and institutions in the United States were willing to do business with Jeffrey Epstein right until the moment he died. What are we going to be able to find out? When are we going to be able to find out more about Jeffrey Epstein's financial dealings and who was ensnared? I know that Senator Ron Wyden has really been pursuing this, but what does Oversight have going here?
Yeah, so we have not sent separate subpoenas out to financial institutions. Something that we discussed with some of our members that are on Oversight as well as financial services was actually widening the scope of this to the extent that we would then have financial services be the ones to send out subpoenas to Treasury, and kind of starting there. And so the idea is follow the money. As we had a closed door meeting with a number of Epstein survivors, that was one of the things that they told us is like, hey, follow the money. And it is my understanding that if we were to really start to dig there, we would discover that we're not talking about some, you know, ring that was going on just here within the United States, but we're talking about millions of dollars, and we're talking about internationally kind of being traded, and we're talking about trafficking women internationally. If you've watched some of the survivors, you notice that some had accents. Many of these women went into different modeling agencies, and they weren't modeling agencies, they were fronts. So there is a lot to kind of unravel, not to mention it was made clear that he was consistently setting up kind of these sham businesses, and he was just running girls through them. That was one of the accounts that we heard was basically when he did get incarcerated, and I use air quotes for a reason, and he was on work release, he had set up a fake business so that he could go to that fake business on work release, and he was abusing girls there. So there's still just so much that we really need to dig into, and I don't think that there was ever a thorough investigation. And if there was, they absolutely are refusing to give us the information that they have.
Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, thank you so much for being with us tonight.